In this section, we'll be making a clone of one of the most popular apps in recent times, Uber. Now that you're fairly familiar with Pass Server on AWS, I'm going to challenge you to build a clone of the popular taxi app, Uber. Now, this is rather more complicated than the Instagram app that we built before for two reasons. The first, of course, it requires geolocation and maps, so we'll need to integrate the skills that we learned a couple of sections ago with what we know about Pass Server. But also, we'll need to have two sections of the app, one for riders and one for drivers. And then both of those are going to need to communicate with each other. I'm also going to expect you to do a little more of the work yourself this time round, as you are fairly familiar with, as I say, Pass Server and the geolocation aspects of Android apps. And the more you do yourself, the more you will learn. But of course, I'll go through the whole process step by step, and you can watch me doing it if you'd rather learn that way. At the same time, be of course thinking how you might apply this to apps that you're building and how you might work in both geolocation and some social features using Pass Server. So Uber is a pretty straightforward idea. A rider taps on the app when they want to take a car somewhere, and then a nearby driver is alerted of that rider and then goes and picks them up. So simple idea, but for us it will give us an opportunity to merge our Pass Server cloud storage skills with maps and GPS, which are perhaps the two most powerful aspects of mobile apps working together. So it should be a lot of fun, and we're going to start over on AWS creating a new EC2 instance for our Pass Server code. So if you missed that, go to aws.amazon.com where we went before for Instagram, and we're just going to follow that process again. If you really don't want to go through the process again, you can use the same Pass Server setup as before, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's easier to keep different instances and apps separate and will cause less confusion in the long term. So here we go, we're logging into AWS, and then we'll jump over to EC2. Remember, it's in the services drop down as well, either over there or over there. And then, as before, we want to launch a new EC2 instance. So click the big blue Launch Instance button. And then down to AWS Marketplace, search for Pass, and select Pass Server powered by Bitnami. Make sure you choose the T2 Micro instance to avoid any charges. And then click Launch. I'm going to create a new key pair, and this is going to be Uber Android key pair. Download that, and then launch instance. And that's now in the process of setting up. So while that's doing that, let's jump over and download our Pass project. So androiddevcourse.com/pass project.zip. So we'll open that up, and then when that's downloaded, we can see we've got it there on the desktop. So I'm now going to open that up in Android Studio and get it ready to change our new Pass Server settings. Actually, I will just rename the folder to Uber, and then we're looking in Users Rob Percival Desktop, and there it is. Okay, so while that's opening up, back over to Firefox and our EC2 management console. And now we want to connect to our new instance. As before, we'll use our Java SSH client, and the key path, remember, if you're on Windows, it will be wherever you saved it. If you're in Mac, it'll be something like /users/ and then your username, and then wherever you saved it. So for me it was the desktop, and then just to remind myself, I called it Uber Android keypair.pem. There we go, and I definitely don't want to type that in next time, so I'll store it in the browser cache. and then launch SSH client, and off we go. And here we go. So now we're logged into the server via SSH or secure shell. So we start by changing directory using cd to apps/pass/htdocs, which is where the pass files are stored. And then we use vi to open up the Vim text editor, and we want to edit the file server.js because that has all our server settings in it. And here we go. So I'll start by copying the app ID and then back over to Android Studio. Here's our Uber app. So we'll open up the project, Java, starter application, and then our new application ID goes in there. Next, the client key, which is the same as the master key. So copy that. There we go. And then the server is that long URL there. Don't forget the slash at the end. Alright, so we'll run that on our Nexus device, and while it's running, we'll jump back over to Firefox and enter the URL again so that we can view the data browser, which is exactly the same URL, but instead of pass, it has apps on the end. And here we go. So here's our data browser. Tap on there. So we haven't got anything in there yet, but when our app is up and running, which it should be soon. Now we do have a small issue here. I think that was worth leaving in. What's happened here, this has failed because of invalid session tokens. What's going on is that the Pass Starter project is recognized as the same app as the Instagram project that we had before. So it's trying to log on as the previous user, but because we've got a new Pass installation, that's not working. So what I'd recommend doing is between apps, if you're using the same simulator, just delete the app by dragging it to uninstall, and then reinstall it again via Android Studio, and that will get rid of the nasty invalid session token error. Alright, let's have a look. And there we go, much better. Pass result, successful. And just to confirm, let's jump back over to Firefox and refresh the page, and we should now see not only a user, but also the example object. And there we go. Alright, so now we're set up to use Pass once again for our Uber app. Let's go on to the next video where we're going to be creating our Pass anonymous login page. Now that we've got our Uber app set up on Pass server, it's time to create our login screen. And just for variety's sake, I'm going to do something a little differently this time. With Uber, or at least our version of Uber, there's no actual need for a username and a password. We could consider it more or less a one-time use app. At least the rider will come along and access the app and then request an Uber, and the driver will come and pick them up. There's no actual need for a username and password there. Obviously in the real app it is required for things like taking payments and remembering past locations, but to show you that you can have a social app using a cloud service without a login, I thought I'd show you how to do that here. So this is the login page that I'd like you to recreate or make something better. And we've got our Uber logo at the top there. Our rider and driver, this uses a switch to choose between rider and driver, and then when the user clicks get started, it at the moment just logs redirecting as driver or rider. It also uses the pass server anonymous login, which works in a very, very similar way to the login that we saw in the Instagram section. So I think you'll be able to figure that out. But if not, of course, just follow along with me. So best of luck. Off you go. Hope it goes well. Okay, as always, hope that went well. I'm going to begin by jumping over to Firefox and just quickly getting the Uber logo to work with. So just search for Uber logo. I'll go for that nice white one there. It's a reasonable size for us. Goes without saying that you shouldn't use the Uber logo in any real apps, but it's fine if you're just testing things out. So I'll call it Uber logo. And then we'll jump back over to Android Studio and create a new drawable directory. And then back over to Finder or Windows Explorer to find the logo that you've downloaded. Oops, it looks like it's lost the extension, so we'll just pop .png on the end there. And then Command or Control C to select it, over to Drawable, Command or Control V to paste it in. Alright, now over to our main layout. And then we'll get rid of our text view and we'll build our layout. So I'll start from the top with our image view. And then as we're in 2.2, we'll automatically pop up with a resource search, and then we'll add Uber just like that. And again, I'll change the height 100 dps. Yeah, that looks great. Okay, then we'll bring in our switch to choose between a driver and a rider. And let's zoom in a little here. So I'm going to get rid of the text there. So I'm going to use two text views, because it's not exactly as if we're switching something on or off. We're just choosing between two options. So let's bring in a text view to the right there. And we'll just make sure it's nicely vertically centered. There we go. So this is going to be the driver option. And then we'll have another text view to the left. Again, let's drag it around. And this is going to be the rider option. Now, in order to get those perfectly aligned, it would likely be worth having a quick look at the XML. And you can see here we've got a 12 pixel margin to the left of this one and a 14 pixel there. So if I update that to 14 on both sides, then we should be nice and symmetrical. Great. And then we just need a button to allow the user to get started. There we go. So we'll give this an on-click method of get started. And the only user interface element we're actually interested in is this switch here. So I'll call it a user type switch. There we go. All right, so that's our layout. Let's jump over to main activity. and we're going to want to be doing everything when that button is clicked. So we'll create a method called getStarted, which will be called by a view, i.e. the button, which we'll call view. And for now, before we do our test run, we'll just see if we can get the value of that switch. So let's create a switch variable, which will link to this switch. So we'll call it user type switch. And this is going to be a switch. We'll find it by its ID, r.id.user type switch. And for now, I'll just log switch value. And the switch value is going to be user type switch. And then we want is checked. And that's going to need to be converted to a string. So let's let Android Studio suggest that for us. And one other small thing, as I mentioned, I would like to hide the action bar to give this more of a full screen feel. So let's very quickly do that. It's actually very easy to do. All we do is get the support action bar and hide it. There we go. So let's have a look. We should now have this layout. So our switch in the middle, and then our rider and driver nicely aligned either side of it, our get started button and our Uber logo. And there we go. So let's just check that currently the switch value is false. If we switch it on, it becomes true, etc. Brilliant. And you notice the action bar was hidden there, so we've got a nice full screen app. The only thing is, I think it's a little bit too dense. So I'm just going to stretch things out a bit. I'm not too worried about design in this course, but it's a little bit too scrunched up for my liking. So let's change this to 150 dp, so a bit of a bigger logo. And then let's move things down a little. So we'll change the margin tops here to 50. Driver and rider will leave the same, and then the margin top here we'll have as 50 as well. Maybe slightly too much. We'll make it 40 and 40. And we can live with that. Excellent. So now we need to do the work on pass to set up our user. As I mentioned, we're going to be using anonymous users this time. So let's start by checking to see whether or not the user's logged in. So we use pass user dot get current user. If that's null, then we'll try and log the user in. And we do this using pass anonymous utils. So utilities dot login. And this is going to have a login callback. And as it's anonymous, we're not sending any details. So we'll just do a check to see if E is null. Then we'll log info anonymous login successful. Else we'll log anonymous login failed. So let's just check that out. As it's an anonymous login, obviously we're not sending any details, and login is essentially the same as signing up as well. So we'll still be saving the user's details on our device until they log out. So we won't lose the information about whether they're a driver or a rider, or whatever their latest ride is. But we just save the user the hassle of entering a username and password. So let's get the monitor up and running. And there we go, you can see anonymous login successful. And then let's just jump over to our data browser and refresh that. And we should now see a user there as well. It's also probably worth switching off automatic user here, because we are using anonymous user now, which is slightly different to automatic user. And I'll also get rid of that code saving the example object. We don't need that happening every time. Okay, there we go. So here's our user with their randomly generated username. Alright, so we're nearly done for this video. We just need to save the settings of whether the user is going to be a rider or a driver. So that will be stored when the Get Started button is pressed. So let's take our pass user, get the current user, and then put, and I'll call it rider or driver. And then we want to set it to a driver if the switch is true, i.e. to the right, and a rider if it's not. So let's set a string variable, user type to be rider by default, and then if user type switch dot is checked, then we'll change the user type to driver. And then here, then we'll just put the user type there. And then, of course, we're now ready to redirect to the next page of our app, which we don't have yet. So for now, I'll just log info redirecting as, and then we'll put the user type in there as well. And we do also just want to check down here if we do have a current user, if they've already set up whether they're a rider or a driver, we don't want to ask them again. So let's check to see if pass user dot get current user dot get, and then rider or driver, if that's not null, i.e. if it's rider or driver, then we'll do the same thing. So info and then redirecting as, and this time it's pass user dot get current user dot get rider or driver. So in the next video, one of the first things we'll do is create the new activity, and we'll redirect appropriately. So the riders will need to be directed to a different activity to the drivers. Okay, let's see that in action. And there we are. So I'll just bring up the log. So we logged in successfully. And then if we click that, we're redirecting as rider or redirecting as driver. Excellent. So that's as far as we're going to go in this video. We've got our login screen all set up. In the next video, we'll begin with the rider activity, which will essentially be a map showing the rider's location and giving them the option to call an Uber.